Now I'm going to tell you about one of the least known but most surprising victories of World War II. How did a handful of British and Commonwealth soldiers bring an army 4 times their size to its knees? This is the kind of story that would make Hollywood jealous, and believe me, after hearing this story, your perspective on history will change. If you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe and don't miss new videos. 1941. The world is burning. Hitler has already conquered Europe, and Britain stands alone. France has fallen, Poland has been crushed, Norway is under occupation. Everyone's eyes are on Europe, North Africa, and the submarine war in the Atlantic. But in the east of Africa, in a corner no one really cares about, one of history's most lopsided victories is about to be written. A victory so remarkable that military historians still study it with amazement today. If this is your first time on this channel and you want to discover the untold stories of World War II, subscribe now and turn on notifications because this video is going to surprise you. Every day we bring forgotten stories of heroism to light. If you're ready, let's begin our story. East Africa, the lands of present-day Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. This region was known as Italian East Africa. Benito Mussolini's pride, the heart of the Italian Empire in Africa, the concrete expression of his dream to revive Rome's ancient glory. Mussolini saw himself as a new Caesar, and Africa was the cornerstone of that dream. At the beginning of 1941, there were approximately 300,000 Italian and colonial soldiers in these territories. This is a massive number. For comparison, the total Allied force that landed at Normandy on D-Day was about 150,000, so the Italians had twice that force in East Africa. So who was facing them? About 70,000 British, Indian, South African, East African, and West African soldiers. That's roughly a 4-to-1 imbalance. In some areas, this ratio reached 5-to-1, even 6-to-1. Under normal circumstances, anyone hearing these numbers would think the Italians would win, right? Logic would suggest that. But as you know, wars aren't won by numbers alone. Leadership, strategy, morale, and determination are just as important as troop strength, maybe even more important. History is full of examples. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartans stood against thousands of Persians. At Agincourt, English archers devastated French knights. And in 1941 in East Africa, a handful of Commonwealth soldiers would achieve the impossible. Our story actually begins in 1940. On a hot day in June, Mussolini addresses the people of Rome from his balcony. Emboldened by Hitler's defeat of France, he declares war on Britain and France. The man was a complete opportunist. While Germany did all the work, he wanted a share of the spoils. In Italian, they call this pugnalata alla schiena, a stab in the back. With France already on the ground, Mussolini delivers his kick. Mussolini's calculation seemed simple. The British are already exhausted from dealing with Germany. They're trying to protect their own islands. They can't afford to send troops to their African colonies. It would be foolish to miss this opportunity. The Suez Canal, Egypt, the Mediterranean should belong to Italy, just like during the Roman Empire. Pretty cunning, isn't it? What do you think about this? Write it in the comments. Mussolini's plan is grand, even megalomaniacal. Seize the Suez Canal, take Egypt, turn the Mediterranean into an Italian lake, advance east from Libya, north from East Africa, trap the British between two fires, cut off the oil routes, bring Britain to its knees. On paper, a logical plan, but plans that stay on paper usually end in failure.
The Italian forces in East Africa were a critical part of this plan. If these forces could advance north toward Egypt, the British would really be in trouble. If they took Sudan, they would control the Nile. If they took Kenya, they would have access to the Indian Ocean. They already controlled Somalia, so the southern entrance to the Red Sea was in their hands. In August 1940, the Italians make their move. Generals at the map tables, soldiers waiting at the border. The first target is British Somaliland, a small colony, a small garrison. It should be an easy bite. And it was. Their numerical superiority was so overwhelming that the small British garrison was forced to retreat without much resistance. An evacuation was made from the port of Berbera. The British boarded ships and fled to Aden. The Italians entered British Somaliland making victory signs. They didn't stop there. They took Kassala on the Sudan border. They took Galabat. They took Moyale on the Kenya border. Progress on every front. News of fresh victories every day. Italy had gained momentum. Mussolini was drunk with victory. Newspapers in Rome ran euphoric headlines. The Duce's soldiers conquer Africa. Italian soldiers were welcomed like heroes. The fascist propaganda machine was running at full speed. Newsreels played before cinema screenings showing Italian soldiers' victories in Africa. The public applauded enthusiastically. But wait, hold on a second. These victories aren't as brilliant as they seem. Let's step back and look at the big picture. Why did the British retreat so easily? Why didn't they put up serious resistance? The answer is simple, because they withdrew deliberately. This wasn't a defeat, it was a tactical maneuver. General Archibald Wavell had a much bigger plan in mind. If you find this story interesting, subscribe and like. Who is Wavell? The commander of all British forces in the Middle East, responsible for a vast area of 4.5 million square kilometers. From Egypt to Iraq, from Sudan to Iran, everything is on his desk. And his resources are extremely limited. London is giving priority to Europe and North Africa. There aren't many soldiers to spare for East Africa. Wavell is a brilliant strategist. He lost an eye at Ypres in World War I, but his strategic vision is crystal clear. He knows how to win the war not just with weapons, but with intelligence. He knows how to retreat from weak points and strike from strong ones. He knows Sun Tzu's art of war by heart and applies it. Wavell allows the Italians to take Somaliland. He doesn't want to waste valuable soldiers on a piece of land with low strategic importance. This is just a tactical step back. His real aim is to spread the Italians across long supply lines, strain them logistically, wait for them to tire, and then deliver the decisive blow. Pretty smart, isn't it? After all, you can't win wars without intelligence. Think about it. The Italians now have to control a vast geography: Ethiopia's mountainous terrain, Somalia's deserts, Eritrea's rugged cliffs. They have to distribute soldiers across all these territories, protect supply lines, deal with local resistance. Their forces are spread thin like a wafer, and Wavell is waiting for exactly this. Toward the end of 1940, the British are quietly preparing, without drawing attention, without making noise, step by step. Reinforcement units arrive from the Indian Army. Ships depart from Bombay, Calcutta, Karachi. These soldiers will fight on a continent they've never known, thousands of kilometers from their families. Experienced soldiers join from South Africa. These are veterans who have seen war before, who have been under fire. They know how to fight on African soil. They're accustomed to the heat, the dust, the harsh conditions. Commonwealth soldiers gather from East Africa, West Africa, from all corners of the world, from Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Uganda. This is a true imperial army. People who speak different languages, believe in different religions, come from different cultures, coming together for one purpose: to stop fascism. And this is a very important point. I want you to stop and think about this. World War II was not just Britain's war. This was a common struggle of all nations fighting for freedom. Indian soldiers fought shoulder to shoulder with British officers. South African pilots supported East African infantry. These people often didn't even understand each other's language, but they fought together against the same enemy. Indian soldiers died thousands of kilometers from home, in lands they had never seen, away from their families, their children, their loved ones.
Letters would only arrive after journeys lasting weeks. Many never returned. African soldiers may have fought on the side of a colonial power, but at the same time they stood against a much greater evil. Fascism wasn't just Europe's problem. If it had won, it would have plunged the whole world into darkness. The sacrifice of these people should never be forgotten. January 1941, the first days of the new year. Wavell presses the button. Months of preparation, planning, and intelligence gathering come to an end. The operation begins. An attack is planned from two separate columns. In the north, forces under General William Platt's command enter Eritrea and northern Ethiopia from Sudan. This is an experienced general who trusts his men. Platt has Indian units under his command, British units, armored vehicles, artillery batteries, everything is ready. In the south, forces under General Alan Cunningham's command advance from Kenya toward Italian Somaliland and southern Ethiopia. Cunningham is the brother of the famous Admiral Andrew Cunningham, proof that naval families can also be effective on land. Cunningham likes to move fast. He wants to strike without giving the enemy a chance to think. This is a classic pincer movement, catching the Italians between two fires, simultaneous pressure in the north and south, dividing enemy forces in two, preventing them from supporting each other, then destroying them piece by piece. A simple but effective strategy. Of course, executing it isn't easy. Cunningham's advance in the south is like a blitzkrieg, the African version of lightning war. The man moves incredibly fast. He captures Italian Somaliland not in weeks but in days. He shatters enemy defense lines. Mogadishu falls, Somalia's capital, an important port. The Italians are in shock. They didn't expect it to happen this fast. Harar falls, the historic city in eastern Ethiopia. Troops pour north like a flood. Before the Italians know what's happening, they find themselves retreating. This isn't a planned withdrawal, it's a chaotic flight. Heavy weapons are left behind, supply depots fall into enemy hands, morale collapses. Don't forget to subscribe and like for these heroes. Cunningham's forces cover 1,700 miles in 60 days. This is an incredible distance. In difficult terrain conditions, in enemy territory, with limited supply lines, one of the fastest advances in military history. In the north, things are a bit harder. The Keren Pass in Eritrea is the Italians' strongest defense line. This place is like a natural fortress, steep cliffs, narrow passes, perfect defensive positions. The kind of fortress that would have been called impregnable if it had been built centuries ago. The Italians really resist here. Their commanders know how to fight. Their soldiers are motivated. Keren isn't just a strategic point, it's also a matter of pride. They know if they lose here, the war is over. The Battle of Keren lasts until the end of March, 53 days of fierce fighting. Both sides suffer heavy casualties. Hand-to-hand combat on the cliffs, bayonet charges, grenades, all the horrors of modern warfare. But eventually Keren falls too. British and Indian soldiers fight with incredible determination. They climb the cliffs, pass through narrow passes, advance under enemy fire. They don't take a step back.
Among the heroes of this battle, the Gurkha units of the Indian Army stand out particularly. These small but steel-hard Nepalese warriors are unmatched in close-quarters combat. They spread fear with their legendary kukri knives. The Italians are terrified of them. Italian soldiers panic when they hear the Gurkhas are coming. At the beginning of April 1941, the great moment arrives. Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital, is liberated. 5 years of occupation come to an end. The Italians had occupied this city in 1936. They had overthrown Emperor Haile Selassie's throne and exploited the country. They had used mustard gas and massacred civilians, and now, in just a few months, everything is reversed. Haile Selassie returns to his capital in a victory parade.
He had spent 5 years in exile, begging for help at the League of Nations in Geneva, but no one had listened. Now he returns as a triumphant ruler. His people greet him with tears. But the war isn't over yet. A significant portion of Italian forces are still resisting. Scattered units, isolated garrisons, and most importantly, the Duke of Aosta, Viceroy of East Africa, has no intention of surrendering. He will fight to his last breath. The Duke of Aosta is an interesting character. Educated at Eton and Oxford, he speaks perfect English. An Italian prince who fought on the same side as the British in World War I. He served as a pilot in the Italian Air Force and earned medals for bravery. Now he's fighting against his former allies, one of history's strange ironies. The Duke of Aosta actually doesn't want this war. He's against Mussolini's alliance with Hitler, but he's a soldier and obeys orders. He gathers his remaining forces and takes a position for a final stand. He prefers to die fighting honorably rather than surrender. His target is Amba Alagi, a mountain rising 12,000 feet above sea level, above the clouds, like a natural fortress, surrounded by steep cliffs, accessible only by a few narrow paths, a place that seems easy to defend and nearly impossible to capture. The Italians are determined to fight here to their last breath. And here we come to the most critical point of our story, the Battle of Amba Alagi. This clash, taking place at 12,000 feet above the clouds in a forgotten corner of the world, would create one of the most dramatic scenes of World War II. British and Commonwealth forces gather at the foot of the mountain. Cunningham's men from the south, Platt's men from the north. The pincer is about to close. Above, in positions near the summit, the Duke of Aosta and about 7,000 Italian soldiers are waiting, the last line of defense, the last hope. General Cunningham's and General Platt's men are approaching from 2 columns. The pincer is about to be completed. The fall of Amba Alagi seems imminent, but the Italians are determined to show they won't be an easy target. This is a matter of life and death, and they're acting accordingly. In the rest of this video, I'll tell you how Amba Alagi fell, the Duke of Aosta's honorable surrender, and how this victory affected the course of World War II. But first, I'd like you to take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. This is how the algorithm works, and your likes help these stories reach more people. Are you curious about the rest of the story? Then get ready. Let's continue.
Welcome to Part 2. Let's continue our story right where we left off. Amba Alagi. Etch this name into your memory, because what I'm about to tell you is the story of one of the most dramatic sieges of World War II. A life and death struggle taking place at 12,000 feet among the clouds, where oxygen is thin and the cold cuts to the bone. Mid-April 1941. In the heart of Ethiopia, a massive mountain rises toward the sky, Amba Alagi. In the local language, it means Great Mountain, and it truly is great, 12,000 feet above sea level, about 3,600 meters. Near the summit, there's a small chapel, as if built at the point closest to God, and around it, hell is boiling. To understand the mountain's structure, imagine a starfish, ridges extending outward from the center, each forming a separate line of defense. Between them, deep valleys and steep crevices. Climbing is already difficult, and when you're being fired upon from above, it's nearly impossible. Nature designed this mountain as if it were a fortress. This is exactly why the Duke of Aosta chose this place. He has about 7,000 soldiers with him, what remains of his once 300,000-strong army. But these 7,000 are the most determined ones, the most loyal ones, the ones ready to fight to the end. They have ammunition, they have food, they have water sources. At least they can hold out for a while. The Italians had prepared defensive positions months in advance.
Machine gun nests hidden among the rocks, artillery batteries placed at strategic points, minefields protecting narrow passes. Every inch of ground arranged for defense. This place is a death trap in the true sense. And there's an interesting twist of history here. Amba Alagi had been the scene of a battle before. In 1895, during the First Italo-Ethiopian War, the Italians were defeated here by the Ethiopians. The Italian commander at that time, Toselli, died here along with thousands of his soldiers. Now, almost 50 years later, another Italian commander was making his last stand on the same mountain. Fate, coincidence, or history's bitter joke? Who knows? British and Commonwealth forces take positions at the foot of the mountain. General Cunningham's units from the south, General Platt's units from the north. They're preparing to close like two giant jaws. But this won't be easy. Everyone knows that. Under Cunningham's command are South African units. These are tough men. They grew up in Africa's harsh conditions. They know how to fight in open terrain. Alongside them are East African soldiers, units from Kenya, Uganda, Tanganyika. In a sense, these people are fighting for their own land. The Italian presence in Africa is a threat to them as well. Under Platt's command are elite units of the Indian Army, Gurkha battalions, Sikh regiments, Punjabi infantry. These men are among the most reliable units in the British Army, disciplined, brave, resilient, representatives of a tradition that has been fighting for centuries. The siege begins in mid-April. In the first phase, the British try to capture the positions at the foot of the mountain. This is relatively easy because the Italians have kept their main forces close to the summit. But the higher you go, the fiercer the resistance becomes. The first serious clashes occur on the southern slope of the mountain. Italian machine guns open fire, bullets ricochet off the rocks, men fall. The first attack is repulsed. A second attempt is made, this time from a different route, again unsuccessful. The Italians are keeping every path under fire. Looking down from above provides a great advantage. You can see the approaching enemy from kilometers away.
General Cunningham is forced to change strategy. Direct assault isn't working. They're taking too many casualties. Instead, he decides to tighten the siege, completely cut off Italian supply lines, force them to surrender through hunger and thirst. A strategy that requires patience but means fewer lives lost. From the north, General Platt's forces encounter similar problems. Indian units try to climb the northern slope of the mountain, but the Italian defense is too strong. Even Gurkha soldiers are having difficulty advancing, and this is a rare situation for the Gurkhas. Let's get to know the Gurkhas a little better. These men come from the mountainous regions of Nepal, small in stature but incredibly resilient. They're accustomed to high altitude. Breathing thin air isn't a problem for them. The kukri knives in their hands are legendary. According to legend, when a Gurkha draws his kukri from its sheath, he cannot put it back without drawing blood. Perhaps an exaggerated legend, but the courage and ferocity of the Gurkhas in battle is real. At Amba Alagi, the Gurkhas take on the most difficult tasks: night raids, reconnaissance operations, infiltration attempts through narrow passes. They manage to reach Italian positions several times, but breaking through the main lines isn't possible. This time, the Italians are really fighting. The first week of the siege passes like this: small skirmishes, limited advances, constant casualties. Neither can the British achieve a decisive victory, nor can the Italians break through the siege. It looks like a stalemate. But time is working against the Italians. Each passing day, supplies diminish. Water shortage begins. Fighting at high altitude in cold weather without adequate nutrition becomes increasingly difficult. There's no medicine for the wounded. Surgical conditions are primitive. Soldiers begin falling ill.
The Duke of Aosta is aware of the situation. He's a good commander and knows his men's limits. He also knows that help won't come. Italy is far away, and the British Navy controls the Mediterranean. Italian forces in North Africa are busy with their own problems. East Africa is completely isolated. But the Duke isn't thinking of surrendering yet. His honor won't allow it. The promise he gave to his soldiers won't allow it. He'll hold out as long as he can. To him, every day gained is a victory. The British aren't sitting idle either, of course. While tightening the siege, they're also waging psychological warfare. Announcements in Italian are made through loudspeakers, saying those who surrender will be treated well. Leaflets are dropped, saying the war is lost. Some Italian soldiers are convinced and surrender, but the majority resists. Toward the end of April, the British decide to try a new tactic: artillery bombardment. Heavy guns are brought to the foot of the mountain. 4.5-inch howitzers from South Africa are positioned, and the fire begins. Artillery shells explode on the mountainside, rocks shatter, earth is thrown into the air. Italian positions are pounded, day and night, without stopping. This is a terrible experience for those under siege. Death coming from you know not where, constant noise, never-ending fear. But artillery fire isn't always effective in mountainous terrain. Shells hit rocks and explode, but soldiers in deep trenches can stay protected. The Italians take casualties, of course, but the defense still holds. The Duke of Aosta continues to motivate his men. Meanwhile, the war continues on another front. Ethiopian guerrilla forces attack Italian supply lines. Irregular units trained by Ord Wingate set ambushes in the mountains, hit convoys, disrupt Italian communications. This guerrilla warfare makes the job easier for regular forces. Let's get to know Wingate a little. This man is a true eccentric, a Zionist bordering on religious fanaticism, a genius with strange habits. He likes to walk around naked, eats raw onions, doesn't care about traditional military rules, but he's a genius when it comes to guerrilla warfare. What he did in Ethiopia would later form the basis for the Chindit operations in Burma. Wingate's unit, which he named Gideon Force, consists of British officers, Ethiopian fighters, and soldiers from Sudan. Their numbers are few, but their impact is great. They demoralize the Italians, deplete their resources, distract their attention. At the beginning of May, the siege enters a critical phase. The Italians have almost run out of water. The water sources on the mountain are insufficient. There's no way to transport it. Soldiers are suffering from thirst. Food is also running low. Rations are cut in half, then to a quarter. The Duke of Aosta faces a difficult decision. Will he drive his men to death by leaving them hungry and thirsty, or will he seek an honorable surrender? What does military tradition say about this? In a hopeless situation, when there's zero chance of help coming, does it make sense to resist further? These questions go through the mind of every besieged commander. In history, some have chosen to fight to their last breath, others have acted rationally and surrendered. The Duke of Aosta will be in the second group, but not yet. He wants to resist a little longer. In the first week of May, the final major clashes take place. The British launch their final assault, this time a coordinated attack from every direction: South Africans from the south, Indians from the north, East African units from the east. Artillery support, air support, everything is mobilized. The battle lasts 3 days of fierce fighting on the mountain slopes. The Italians defend every position, sell every inch of ground, but the power imbalance is too great. How long can tired, hungry, thirsty soldiers hold out against an enemy superior in numbers and equipment? A South African officer describes those days like this: "The Italians fought bravely, I cannot deny that. But our men were equally brave, and we had ammunition, food, water. They didn't. Sometimes what wins wars is simply logistics. This is a very important point. Wars are not won by heroism alone. Logistics, supply, resource management are just as important as combat skill. The British showed logistical genius in this campaign. They transported soldiers, weapons, ammunition, food from thousands of kilometers away. They established and protected long supply lines in enemy territory. This is an achievement in itself. On the 5th day of May 1941, the Duke of Aosta finally makes his decision. Further resistance is meaningless. His men are dying. His wounded are uncared for. His resources are exhausted. The time for an honorable surrender has come. In the end, the British succeed in winning victory here as well. The white flag is raised. A ceasefire is declared. A meeting with British commanders is requested. The Duke of Aosta straightens his uniform one last time, puts on his medals, girds his sword. He will surrender as an Italian prince and general, head held high, proud, defeated, but not crushed. The surrender ceremony is conducted according to military traditions. The Duke of Aosta shakes hands with British commanders. He's asked to surrender his sword, but the British refuse. "Continue to carry your sword," they say, as an expression of our respect for a brave enemy. This gesture shows the spirit of chivalry lives on even in the midst of war. 7,000 Italian soldiers lay down their weapons and march to prisoner camps, tired, exhausted, but alive. The war is over for them. They'll be able to write letters to their families now. They'll spend the rest of the war in safety. The relief of having escaped death can be read on their faces. The Duke of Aosta is given special treatment, befitting his rank and position. He's sent to prisoner camp in Kenya, but stays there in relatively comfortable conditions. Unfortunately, he won't see the end of the war. He will die of tuberculosis and malaria in 1942, at 44 years old, in a foreign land, as a prisoner. A tragic end. With the fall of Amba Alagi, the East African campaign effectively ends. The remaining Italian resistance is completely cleared within a few months. In November 1941, the last Italian unit surrenders. The Italian East African Empire passes into history. This victory is of great importance to Britain. In the dark days of 1941, when bad news is coming from every front, news of victory from East Africa boosts morale. The British people begin to believe that the war can be won. The results are important strategically as well. The Red Sea is now safe. Allied ships can easily reach Suez. British dominance in the Indian Ocean is consolidated. Oil resources in the Middle East are secured. And, perhaps most importantly, this victory teaches lessons on how a war is won. Numerical superiority isn't everything. Leadership, strategy, logistics, morale, these are just as important as combat skill. Commanders like Wavell, Cunningham, and Platt applied these lessons perfectly. In this video, I told you how Amba Alagi fell and how the Italian army collapsed. But the story doesn't end here. In the final part, I'll tell you how this victory affected world history, the stories of forgotten heroes, and the lessons to be drawn from this war. So stay tuned to the channel, subscribe, and like the video for these great acts of heroism. Now, let's move on to the final part. Welcome to the final part. We're continuing at full speed. Amba Alagi has fallen. The Italian East African Empire has passed into history. But what was the true significance of this victory? Why are we telling this story today, more than 80 years later? Because the lessons to be drawn from this war are timeless, and the heroes of this war don't deserve to be forgotten. Their story is our story. Let's review the numbers once more, because these numbers are truly mind-boggling. At the start of the campaign, the Italians controlled East Africa with approximately 300,000 soldiers, a massive force. Against them stood about 70,000 Commonwealth soldiers. That's a 4-to-1 ratio, and in some areas 5-to-1, even 6-to-1 imbalance. Under normal circumstances, thinking in military terms, these numbers would guarantee an Italian victory. No gambler would bet on the British with those odds. But what happened? History surprised us once again. In just a few months, with incredible speed, all Italian forces were either destroyed or captured. More than 130,000 Italian soldiers raised the white flag and surrendered. Commonwealth casualties were only a few thousand. This ratio is a success rate rarely seen in military history, almost unparalleled. A victory of the kind that will be taught as a lesson in the world's most prestigious military academies and shown as an example to future generations. Subscribe for this great victory. Thank you. So how was this miracle possible? The answer to this question seems simple, but is actually multi-layered and multi-dimensional. Let's examine each layer one by one, because these lessons apply not just to war, but to every area of life. The first and perhaps most important factor is leadership. The trio of Wavell, Cunningham, and Platt worked in perfect harmony. There was a synchronization between them as if they had been working together for years. Each was a master in his own field, and they complemented each other flawlessly. Wavell drew up the grand strategy, decided how the pieces on the chessboard would move. Cunningham and Platt brought this strategy to life in the field. They put their egos aside and worked for the common goal. This kind of harmony isn't always seen. History is full of stories of generals competing and clashing with each other. But in East Africa, things were different, and this brought victory for Britain. The second critical factor was the matter of morale. Commonwealth soldiers knew very well what they were fighting for. They had taken up arms against fascism, for freedom, to protect their families and homelands. Thousands of kilometers from home, in lands they had never known, but for a cause they believed in. This belief gave them strength. It kept them standing even when they were tired, when they felt hopeless, when they lost their friends. Italian soldiers, on the other hand, were mostly unwilling and lacked motivation. They felt sacrificed to Mussolini's adventurous, reckless policies. They didn't fully understand why they were fighting in the middle of Africa, so far from home. This war wasn't their war. They were shedding their blood for the Duce's ego gratification. This morale difference showed itself clearly on the front. Same weapons, similar training, but completely different wills to fight. The third factor was logistical genius. This word might sound boring, but what wins wars is often logistics. Even the bravest soldier can't fight on an empty stomach with a rifle without bullets. The British provided uninterrupted supply from thousands of kilometers away, across oceanic distances. Ships crossed the Indian Ocean. Trains carried materials into the interior of Africa. Trucks worked day and night on dusty roads. Camels crossed deserts. Even elephants were used to carry loads in the most difficult terrain. This logistical miracle was the unseen hero of the war. The Italians, on the contrary, remained isolated, alone, and helpless. The Royal Navy, controlling the Mediterranean with an iron fist, completely prevented help from coming from the Italian mainland. Generals in Rome might look at the map and give orders, but the resources to carry out those orders couldn't reach East Africa. Soldiers had to fight with dwindling ammunition and diminishing supplies. The fourth factor was tactical flexibility and adaptability. British commanders didn't stick to the plan blindly or dogmatically. As conditions changed and the enemy's moves became clear, they changed their tactics. The battlefield was like a chessboard, and they developed new moves after each move. Cunningham's lightning-fast advance, his blitzkrieg-style attack that gave the enemy no room to breathe. Platt's patient, methodical siege at Keren. A different approach for each situation, a different solution for each problem. This flexibility was one of the keys to winning. These lessons aren't just for military history enthusiasts, just for people in uniform. They're universal truths that apply in business, politics, sports, and daily life. Leadership, morale, resource management, and flexibility are the keys to success in every field. Timeless, universal truths carried from a war more than 80 years ago to today. Let's not forget these great achievements. Subscribe to the channel and like the video. Now let's look at the forgotten heroes, the extraordinary stories of ordinary people whose names don't appear in history books. Thousands, tens of thousands of people showed extraordinary courage in this war, but their names never made it into history books. They didn't receive medals, they didn't make newspaper headlines, films weren't made about them. They fought quietly, some died quietly. Remembering them is our duty, our debt. The contribution of the Indian Army must be particularly and persistently emphasized because it's often overlooked. Did you know that the number of Indian soldiers fighting in this campaign was greater than British soldiers? Gurkha battalions came from the mountains of Nepal, Sikh regiments from the fertile lands of Punjab, Rajput units from the heart of India. They all shed their blood in these distant lands, thousands of kilometers from home, but they were generally ignored in mainstream war narratives in Britain and America, pushed to footnotes, forgotten. The story of Havildar Narbahadur Thapa, a Gurkha soldier, is a symbol of this neglect. On one of the bloodiest days of the Battle of Keren, his unit came under Italian machine gun fire. Bullets were raining down. Raising your head meant death. No one dared to advance. At that moment, Thapa took action. Alone, without telling anyone, he crawled toward the enemy position. He advanced among the stones and rocks, centimeter by centimeter, holding his breath, dancing on the edge of death. When he finally got within range, he threw his grenades and silenced that hellish machine. This heroic action enabled the entire unit to advance and perhaps saved hundreds of lives. I don't know if he received a medal, probably not. His name doesn't appear in the major history books, but he and thousands like him made this victory possible. Let this video be a salute to them. The contribution of African soldiers must also absolutely not be forgotten, not be left to the dusty shelves of history. The King's African Rifles, the Nigeria Regiment, the Gold Coast Regiment, Rhodesian units, all fought shoulder to shoulder in this campaign. These people lived in one of the most complex periods of history, within the contradictory realities of the colonial era. On one hand, they were fighting for Britain, a colonial power, this cannot be denied. On the other, they were standing against a much greater, much darker evil, like fascism. History is not always black and white, it often unfolds in shades of gray. The role of South African units was also extremely critical in this campaign. These tough men were at the forefront of the Amba Alagi siege. They climbed the steep, merciless slopes of the mountain. They advanced with determination under Italian fire, amid whistling bullets. They lost friends, they were wounded, but they didn't step back. They had grown up in Africa's harsh climate. They were accustomed to hardship. This resilience showed itself on the battlefield. And of course, the Ethiopian resistance fighters, the true owners of their own land. For 5 years they lived under occupation, under oppression, under persecution. They lost their families, their lands, their freedom, their dignity. The Italians exploited their country, massacred their people, denigrated their culture. But Ethiopians never gave up. They retreated to the mountains, hid in caves, waged guerrilla warfare, kept their hope, and believed they would one day be free. When the British came, they joined them and played an active role in the liberation of their own country, their own homeland. This was their victory too. Emperor Haile Selassie's personal story is also worth telling separately, an inspiring tale. The speech he gave at the League of Nations in 1936 is considered one of the most powerful, most heartbreaking speeches in history. He stepped up to the podium and addressed the world. He asked for help. He asked for justice, but the world didn't listen to him then. The great powers turned their heads, plugged their ears. Ethiopia was left alone. But Selassie didn't give up. He lived 5 years in exile, never lost hope, and in 1941 he returned to his country as a victorious, proud ruler. He became a living symbol of determination, resolve, and never giving up. This war has another very important legacy: the recognition at last of the vital role of colonial soldiers in World War II. For many years, for decades, war narratives remained Eurocentric. The heroism of white soldiers was told, filmed, written in books. The critical contributions of Indian, African, Caribbean soldiers were ignored, belittled, forgotten. In recent years, this situation has begun to change, thankfully. A more comprehensive, more inclusive, fairer history is now being written. For our British and American viewers, this story may have a very special, very personal meaning. Think about it. Your grandfathers, great-grandfathers, elderly members of your family may have been in this war. Maybe they fought on the rocks of Keren. Maybe they were among the units besieging Amba Alagi. Maybe they were wounded. Maybe they lost friends. Maybe they showed heroism and received medals. I strongly recommend that you research and learn their stories. Look through family archives, take out old photographs, read war diaries if they exist, talk to living relatives. Making this history personal, connecting it to your own family, makes it so much more meaningful, so much more valuable. We must also look at the strategic results of the East African campaign, the big picture. This victory didn't just save a region, didn't just reclaim a piece of land. It affected the course and balance of the entire war. The security of the Red Sea was ensured. The enemy threat was eliminated. Vital Lend-Lease aid coming from America could safely reach Egypt and the Middle East. Middle Eastern oil, the fuel of war machines, was secured. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Also, this victory boosted the morale of the British people sky high. The first half of 1941 was extremely dark, hopeless days for Britain. Germany was advancing on every front, seemed unstoppable. Japan was posing a threat in the Pacific. The future was uncertain. Fear prevailed. It was precisely in this dark period that news of victory from East Africa became a ray of hope, a morale boost. The British people understood that this war could be won, fascism could be defeated, darkness could be dispersed. This campaign also served as a laboratory, a testing ground for future major operations. Desert warfare tactics were tested here. Coordination between air forces and ground forces was developed here. Long-distance logistical operations were perfected here. On the road to the El Alamein victory in North Africa, in the process leading to Rommel's defeat, there were the lessons and experiences of East Africa. Now, I want to ask you an honest question. Were you surprised that you had never heard of this story, Amba Alagi, the East African campaign, before? Because this is one of the least known, least told campaigns of World War II. Everyone knows the Normandy landings, from films, books, documentaries. Everyone has heard of Stalingrad, cold, bloody, epic. Everyone knows Pearl Harbor, Midway, Iwo Jima. But how many people have heard of Amba Alagi? Probably not even 1%. There are many reasons for this, of course. The European and Pacific fronts were much larger, much bloodier, lasted much longer. Millions of people died on those fronts. Media attention naturally focused there. East Africa remained distant, remained exotic, was seen as marginal. Unfortunately, this situation didn't change even after the war ended. Hollywood filmed Normandy many times, but no one made a film about Amba Alagi, at least not yet. But history is not just about big events, giant clashes, armies of millions. Small victories, forgotten heroes, unknown stories are also an inseparable part of history, perhaps the most valuable part. This channel is trying to do exactly that, bringing untold stories to light, remembering forgotten heroes, showing not just part of history, but all of it. With your support, we will continue to do this. Finally, I want to touch on one more important point and establish a balance. In this video, I told the story of the Italian army's defeat and collapse, but I absolutely don't intend to disparage or belittle Italian soldiers wholesale. They too were human beings, children of mothers and fathers. Most were dragged into this war not of their own will, but by force, unwillingly. In a sense, they were victims of the fascist Mussolini regime. They marched to their deaths for the dictator's megalomaniacal dreams. There were those among them who fought bravely and honorably at Amba Alagi. The Duke of Aosta is the best example of this. Yes, history is written by the victors, but the losers have a story too, and that story also deserves respect. As we saw in the example of the Duke of Aosta, even an enemy commander can be shown respect. Humanity can be preserved. When the British returned his sword, they showed that even in the middle of war, amid blood and fire, the spirit of chivalry, of humanity, can survive. This gesture may seem small, but it actually carries great meaning. You can defeat your enemy, but you don't have to trample their honor underfoot. This lesson is valid today and will be valid tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching this video to the end. I'm truly grateful. If this story interested you, if you learned something, don't forget to hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss our new videos, and please share your thoughts in the comments. Which story would you like me to tell? Which forgotten hero are you curious about? Write it, I read it. In our next video, there's an even crazier, even more unbelievable story. Be here so you don't miss it. See ya. Take care of yourselves.